Because control means that you strategize your response in a way that helps you achieve your strategic objective. And the idea of strategic flexibility is this. In a fight, the person who has the most options, the person who has the most flexible strategy will usually win, okay? There's a lot to the escalation ladder, and I'll explain to you how this applies to the US-Iran situation. The first thing America does, of course, is what I call decapitation. If you don't have any more leaders, you don't know what to do, and therefore you surrender, okay? That's the first thing the US tried. It didn't work. So now the United States moves on to attacking military targets, air defenses, and military bases. The idea is that you beat the crap out of the military so they surrender. But that didn't work either, okay? So then, of course, you do an economic embargo where you basically prevent Iran from selling oil to China. And the idea here is that if the government doesn't have money to pay its soldiers, the soldiers will just not fight. So here's the thing, and this is what's really important to understand. Every time America takes another step up that ladder, Iran doesn't escalate back the same way, okay? And Iran responds in a completely different dimension through a proxy, through an economic move, through a political alliance. And this is absolutely maddening for America, because America is burning through resources, burning through political capital, burning through military equipment, and Iran is still standing. So let's look at escalation game number 2. Now, to understand this, I need to teach you something about how wars are actually fought. Basically, when you fight a war, you have to have a correct cost pyramid. And the most simple cost pyramid is this: infantry soldiers. It costs you very little to produce and replace a soldier, but it costs you an enormous amount to produce an airplane. This is important because wars are usually wars of attrition, meaning you have to keep putting resources into winning the war over a long period of time. Now here's the problem. The United States has an inverse pyramid, meaning that air is what's dominant, then naval, then armor, then soldiers. You cannot fight a long war like this. The moment you choose to fight a war structured this way, you have already put yourself at a structural disadvantage. Because you either take out the enemy in like 2 days, right, completely overwhelming them, or you are screwed. Because you cannot replenish your forces fast enough. Israel is a bit more complicated. All right, for Israel, what you want is to destroy CENTCOM, weaken Iran, but not destroy America's presence too quickly. Because Israel actually needs the chaos to continue long enough to redraw the map. And this is what's called the Greater Israel Project. But as you can see, and this is really important, even though United States and Israel are allies, their autonomous strategy is different. Their objectives are different. In fact, in certain ways, they're in conflict. They're both using each other. The greatest threat to American global power is what's called the heartland unifying. Why? Because if the heartland unifies, meaning Russia, Central Asia, Iran, China, they can trade with each other by land through railways. But America is primarily a naval power. Therefore, it requires people to trade by sea. And so America's grand strategy is to make sure there is never any cohesion in the heartland, either by ensuring no great power arises there, or by creating so much conflict that they're always fighting each other. That's why America intervened in World War I and World War II. There was a great fear that Germany would conquer Europe and Asia and effectively create the heartland. Therefore, America had to prevent that from happening. This small island in the Persian Gulf, approximately 25 kilometers off the Iranian coast, handles 90% of Iran's oil exports. Every tanker loading Iranian crude passes through Karg's port facilities. Pipelines from mainland oil fields terminate at Karg. Storage tanks, loading docks, and support infrastructure make this island the economic jugular of the Iranian state. The military plan calls for amphibious assault by Marine forces, supported by Navy SEALs, and potentially additional elements from the 82nd Airborne. Approximately 2,000 to 3,000 troops would land on Karg, seize the port facilities, and establish a permanent garrison. Once secured, Karg becomes a forward operating base for American forces, a logistics hub for supporting operations on the Iranian mainland, and a choke point that controls Iranian oil exports. The strategic logic is that holding Karg gives America leverage over Iran's economy. Oil exports stop, revenue collapses. The regime faces immediate economic crisis that compounds the political crisis created by the Tehran airborne assault. Additionally, Karg provides a defensible position that American forces can actually hold, unlike the Tehran insertion, which is essentially a one-way trip. Karg Island is small, approximately 20 square kilometers. Defensively, it's manageable. The Iranian military presence on the island is limited because it's primarily an industrial facility, not a military base. The garrison would be a few hundred Iranian personnel, mostly security forces protecting the oil infrastructure. American assault forces would outnumber and outgun them significantly. The amphibious landing would be supported by naval gunfire and airstrikes to suppress any resistance before Marines hit the beaches. The actual combat phase of securing the island would probably last a few hours at most. The challenge is not taking Karg, The challenge is holding it. Because once American forces occupy Karg Island, Iran has every incentive to retake it, and they have the capability to make the American garrison's life extremely difficult. Karg is only 25 kilometers from the Iranian mainland, well within range of Iranian artillery, missiles, and drones. The island can be subjected to sustained bombardment that makes normal operations impossible. Supply to the garrison becomes the critical vulnerability. Everything has to come by sea or air. Food, water, ammunition, fuel, all of it shipped from bases in Kuwait or UAE or from naval vessels in the Gulf. And every supply ship, every helicopter, every transport aircraft becomes a target for Iranian missiles and drones. The garrison would essentially be under siege, defending a static position against an enemy with unlimited ability to strike from the adjacent mainland. American forces would have air superiority, theoretically, which provides some protection. But as we've already seen in this conflict, air superiority does not prevent drones and missiles from hitting targets. The burn rate of interceptor missiles defending Karg would be enormous, adding to the existing depletion crisis. The other problem with holding Karg is that it accomplishes nothing strategically significant. Oil exports stop, yes. But Iran has already demonstrated willingness to endure economic hardship in service of strategic goals. Sanctions have been crushing Iranian economy for decades, and the regime survives. Cutting off oil revenue from Karg adds pressure, but doesn't force capitulation. And the moment American forces occupy Karg, Iran has justification to attack shipping throughout the Persian Gulf. Not just American ships, all shipping. Close the Strait of Hormuz. Attack tankers from neutral countries. Escalate to total economic warfare that impacts global oil markets and drags in parties who would otherwise stay neutral. So, Karg becomes another unsustainable position. American forces can take it. They can probably hold it for some period of time. But holding it costs resources, burns through defensive munitions, and doesn't advance strategic objectives. It's a symbolic position that looks significant on maps, but doesn't change the fundamental balance of power. The plan to seize and garrison Karg Island is another example of doing something because political pressure demands action, not because military analysis suggests it will achieve anything meaningful. The current administration, whether through incompetence or deliberate malice, has completely failed to unite the American people behind the war effort. Typically, when America goes to war, there's a rally around the flag moment. Public opinion coalesces around supporting the troops, defeating the enemy, and defending national interests. Political opposition mutes its criticism during the initial phase of conflict. None of that has happened with the Iran war. Public opinion was against the war before it started and has become more opposed as casualties mount and costs escalate. 80% of Americans believe the war is a mistake. 75% want immediate withdrawal. These are not marginal opposition numbers. This is overwhelming public rejection of the entire enterprise. Still, others view it through eschatological lens, religious prophecy that requires Middle East conflict regardless of strategic logic. These divisions mean there's no coherent message. One day, the goal is destroying Iran's nuclear program. The next day, it's regime change. The third day, it's restoring deterrence. Nobody can articulate what success looks like or how we'll know when we've achieved it. And without clarity on objectives, public support cannot be built. While attention focuses on American-Iranian conflict, a quieter catastrophe is unfolding across the Gulf Cooperation Council states. These countries are discovering that the comfortable existence they've enjoyed for decades is built on foundations far more fragile than anyone acknowledged. The fundamental problem is that these states are not naturally viable as modern nations. They exist in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. Extreme heat, no fresh water, no arable land, no significant natural resources except oil and gas. Before oil discovery in the 1930s and 1940s, the region supported only small populations of nomadic herders and coastal traders. Modern cities of millions exist only because oil wealth could pay for desalination plants, food imports, and air conditioning. Water is the critical vulnerability. The Gulf states have almost no renewable freshwater sources, no rivers, no lakes, minimal rainfall. Underground aquifers are brackish and depleting. 90% of water consumption comes from desalination plants that convert seawater to potable water through energy-intensive industrial processes. Iranian missiles and drones have been targeting these desalination facilities, not systematically destroying all of them, but hitting enough to create crisis. In cities where summer temperatures exceed 45 degrees Celsius, where air conditioning runs 24/7, where population density is high, water shortage becomes existential within days. Food is the second vulnerability. The Gulf states import approximately 90% of food consumed. Fruits, vegetables, grains, meat, dairy, everything arrives by ship or aircraft from abroad. And the supply lines are fragile. Ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz under threat of Iranian attack. Airlines canceling flights into the region because of air defense concerns. Supply chains breaking down. Most Gulf states maintain strategic food reserves sufficient for maybe 2 weeks of normal consumption. After that, if imports stop, people go hungry. And hunger in cities of millions, in heat that makes outdoor activity dangerous, creates social breakdown very quickly. The third factor is that Gulf populations have become dependent on imported labor and expertise for everything. Citizens of these countries, particularly in UAE and Qatar, represent a minority of actual residents. The majority are foreign workers, South Asians doing manual labor, Europeans and Americans in management and technical roles, and those foreign workers are leaving. Nobody wants to stay in a war zone. Expatriates are evacuating. Businesses are shutting down. The expertise that keeps infrastructure functioning is departing. What's left is a citizen population that, in many cases, has never worked in productive sectors. Generations raised on oil wealth distributed through government jobs and subsidies. People who don't know how to operate the desalination plants, who don't know how to maintain the power grids, who have never worked in agriculture or manufacturing because those jobs were always done by imported labor. The phrase lazy is crude but captures a reality that Gulf critics have been pointing out for years. When everything is provided by oil, wealth, and foreign workers, when citizens receive generous government stipends for doing minimal work, initiative, and capability atrophy. And now that the crisis has arrived, the skills needed to maintain basic civilization are absent. Saudi Arabia is trying to conscript citizens into emergency services to replace departing foreign workers. The results are mixed at best. You cannot instantly train someone to operate a desalination plant or repair a power grid. The technical knowledge required takes months or years to develop, and the emergency is happening now. The collapse is not immediate. These states still have resources. They can pay premium prices to convince some foreign workers to stay. They can import emergency supplies by routes that avoid the Strait of Hormuz. But the trajectory is clear. Without American military presence ensuring security, without the petrodollar system maintaining wealth flows, without imported labor maintaining infrastructure, the Gulf states are not viable as modern nations. Iranian strategy doesn't require invading and occupying these countries, just making them unlivable. Cut water, cut food, create enough chaos that the expatriate population flees and the infrastructure collapses. The regimes fall not through military defeat, but through inability to provide basic services to their populations. And Iran is succeeding. The Gulf states are bleeding economically, socially, politically, and there's no clear path to recovery as long as the war continues.